is book club week. And Amanda, I have exciting news for you. Are you ready?
Yes, laid on me.
This is our last time talking about this John Holt book.
All right, there we go.
We're
Good
done.
deal.
We
Thank
survived.
goodness.
Okay. I really thought when we picked this for our first book club pick, I was like, John Holt, it doesn't get much more classic homeschooler than John Holt. Like, if we're going to kick off a book club segment for our podcast, let's go John Holt, right? I mean, how could we
hmm
go wrong? Everybody talks about these books as being the thing. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Sometimes the thing isn't actually all it's cracked up to be.
It kind of feels like one of those videos do you ever see on like Instagram or TikTok where it's like social media and then reality, right? And it's social media and it's somebody like frolicking at the ice castles, right? One of those places that are set up in like Minnesota and stuff like that. And then they show the reality and it's like jam packed and it's not lit up nicely and the snow looks muddy, and stuff like
hmm
that. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, so maybe that's the situation, right? It's like that's our
Maybe. Maybe. That's a great point. I see those all the time, right? Because we love traveling and it's always like, oh, let's be like, let me go look at what's really going to be there when we get there. So here you go. This is your behind the scenes look of the social media version versus the reality of reading. Teach your
yeah.
own.
I know we've got our next two books picked out, and the next one I've read, so I'm super excited about that. The third one, neither of us have read, so that'll be another mystery book for the two of us. But I'm excited to see what comes next, and I'm still glad we've read it. Like you said, it's nice to know. Everybody talks about it all the time. It's nice to kind of be in the know and have your own knowledge, your own experience, your own thoughts, and be able to join the conversation, or at least weigh what you're seeing in another conversation against your own experience. So still a good
No,
thing to read.
yeah, I'm totally with you on that. Right. Back in the day, I used to host a New York Times bestseller list book club. And
Ooh.
it was primarily because I didn't have a huge interest in reading New York Times bestseller books. But at the time, it seemed like everywhere I went, people were talking about these books. And I was like, well, if I host the book club, then at least half the time I'll read the book. And the other half of the time, I will have done the research on the questions to ask, and people will have great conversations. So at least I'll be able to talk intelligently about the book, even if I didn't read it. So that's kind of how I'm taking this. This was essentially my New York Times bestseller book club. And we're almost done. So let's do it. We'll wrap up Teach Your Own.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just really glad that we didn't. So being proactive for some of the books that you and I were already familiar with, we've reached out to some of the authors and scheduled author visits.
Oh God.
Could you could could you imagine if we had scheduled?
No.
So John Holt has passed away, but Pat Farenga, who did the revised and updated, which it says on the cover, fully revised and updated for today's families. So when we talked in, I don't know, 2 episodes ago about how they don't think dyslexia is a real thing and learning disabilities are a real thing and all that, that is their definition of fully revised and updated. So, okay.
Yeah.
But could you imagine if we had
No.
invited Pat Farenga to come on as one
Oh,
of
that
our
would have been
guests?
awful because I don't think I could have fixed my face. I I don't, I don't that's so great. I think it's awesome that you wrote this book.
Exactly. Talk to me more about how dyslexia doesn't exist. Yeah.
Oh
Like,
man.
thank goodness. That would have been really bad. But I'm super excited. We do have 2 author visits coming up, and I'm super excited about them. So
Yeah.
they're going to be awesome. All
Yes.
right. So this week, we are talking about our final sections of 11 and 12. You want to kick us off with your first observation of the week, Amanda?
Yeah, so I just have so chapters 11 and 12, right? I will say that I love that chapter 12 starts by saying, quote, there are as many ways to homeschool as there are families who do it. And I didn't necessarily get that from the entire rest of the book. um and I feel like the chapter goes downhill from here. Because then he kind of goes into all of the ways that most of the other ways are wrong. But I did appreciate the fact that he highlighted that, right? It's I think it's true, and there are a couple other right nuggets in here, and I think that's part of the the strength of this particular podcast is looking at all of the different ways and understanding that you are at one end of the spectrum and I'm pretty far to the other end. I'm not at the very far end of it, but pretty far over. And understanding that there's that whole area in between where we are that's also a perfectly fine and acceptable way to homeschool, and that you can have successful, happy kids, whatever success means in your family. And so I liked that before he kept talking.
I love it. I think so. I mentioned in a previous episode that when I decided to homeschool, I went to the public library and I took every single homeschooling book they had off the shelf and went home and started diligently devouring them. And this was before I even pulled my kids out of public school, but I'm kind of a preparer. I'm a researcher, which is funny because you're a researcher too, but we then take our research and go in different directions. And it's funny because sometimes I talk to people who are like, I'm so type A, I could never homeschool. And I'm like, hello, like I'm pretty on top of things there as far as some of that stuff is concerned myself. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily say one way or the other what you can and cannot do in your homeschool world. But so I don't even remember the titles of any of those books that I read when I did that first sweep of the library. I mean, it's like a decade ago. And the only thing I remember was there were a couple of themes. The first was that the first book that I read, I was making notes like constantly in my journal. Go, okay, this. And it took me forever to get through that first book. And then as I kept going, they took me less and less time to get through because the themes started to repeat themselves. The message started to repeat themselves. And I was like, okay, reinforcement. But I think one of the biggest things that I still quote to people today, and I don't even know what book I got it from, was basically this concept that if you feel like a salmon swimming upstream in your homeschool, you're doing it wrong. And so to your point, there's no wrong way to homeschool, right? There's as many ways to homeschool as there are families doing it, was the quote from the book. But there is a wrong way potentially for you or for your kids. And
Yeah.
so I think that's the big thing is, and I've had this chat with my husband just with like general parenting things sometimes, right? Where, he'll get into kind of one of these like tug of wars with the kids over something like silly, more so when they were younger, and I'm like, we're the grown-ups, we're the ones who set the tone for this whole circus act, right? So like they're never going to drop the rope and be like, let me take a step back and think about this logically. Right? They were little at the time, and I was like, that has to be you have to be the one that if something isn't working, you have to step back and evaluate it and go, what's not working here and how do I fix it, right? And so I think that's like one of the biggest things that I see is like people are like, this isn't working and we're so stressed and we fight all the time and the kids are frustrated and they want to go back to school and this and that. And it's like, then you're doing it wrong. Not wrong for everyone, but wrong for you, right? Wrong for your family. And so I think that's kind of the big thing. Like there's a million and one ways to do it. And if what's not working or if what you're doing isn't working, take a step back and retool and rethink. And I think that that's one of the biggest reasons too. I just had this conversation with somebody in a Facebook group the other day, and I was like, do not go out and spend $700 on curriculum, please. Because then when you find out that you're quote unquote doing it wrong, you don't want to, because you're like, well, I already spent $700 and
We're gonna stick it out. We're gonna keep using like.
And then they think homeschooling doesn't work for their family when the reality is it's that big $700 box you bought that doesn't work for your family. So just chill. You do not. That's why our first episode was don't buy curriculum, right? Assess all this other stuff before you buy curriculum, because it really can make or break, I think, the whole experience. And so, yeah, there are ways to homeschool wrong for your family.
Yeah. No, and understanding, and I think it's actually in these chapters, there's a story about this. But understanding, right, that what you want it to be isn't necessarily what your kids need it to be, and vice versa. There was one mom who had unschooled all of her kids, and then her last kid was like, no, I want the workbooks. I want the graded assignments. And she was like, oh, why? That thing of like, there's lots of easy ways to find that out before you spend a stupid amount of money. But it does mean that you have to go slower and you can't approach homeschooling like school at home to figure that out. And I can say that the book definitely helps highlight that. And that's probably, I'll give that as a positive from this particular text.
I like it. Yeah. So very true. All valid, right? We both have notes from page 195. What was your takeaway from 195?
I just liked the fact that it highlighted the way homeschooling can really work. So the quote that I had put down is, if your child wants to learn more about archaeology and you know nothing about the topic and perhaps have no interest in it at all, then you can help them by locating books and materials they can read and use on their own. And it goes on to talk about turning your librarian into a local resource, calling local historical societies and museums, and even college professors. And they're also true. And sometimes I need a reminder of that myself. Had recently been thinking, gosh, my kid would love the opportunity to talk with a history professor, like a college history professor, and just like bat around ideas. And then I was kind of like, oh no, who am I going to find who wants to talk to a 10-year-old about that kind of stuff and really like go deep? But I think the reality is there are probably quite a few people
Mm-hmm.
if I actually put that out there and say, hey, I've got a 10-year-old who's like nerdy into World War I and II, and he wants to learn about all the things and he loves to talk about all of the things. And I am tired. I'm tired of pretending like I care. Like, you want to talk to him for a little bit. Um, so yeah, I liked that part and that story.
All right,
What
you
did you
need to
get from
hook
it?
me up with your kid because I will talk to him about World War II all day long. I taught at one point a year-long class on nothing but World War II. It was a high school history course. And a full year of history on World War II is enough to scratch the surface of World War II. Like there's just so much to it, right? And it was one of the highlights of my week because I had the high school equivalent of your kid in that class. And they knew every battle, they knew every political figure, they knew the geography, they knew the politics, they knew all of it. And they showed up ready to go. And it was just the most awesome class ever. So we
Yeah.
can chat
No,
World War II. I'm in.
we do. I don't know if I told you this story, but he's doing like a end of year research project, and it's the first one that we're trying under this like new writing curriculum that we've been doing. And we talked about all kinds of different things, and I really only asked for a 5-paragraph essay. But I told him to kind of go crazy with it. And we talked about what that might be and all of this kind of stuff. And after lots of discussion, he finally decided on his topic. And I kept encouraging him, narrow it down. That's really big for a 5-paragraph essay. Narrow it
Mhm.
down, narrow it down. His final title was something like um, Important Leaders of World War II and Their Impact on Industry and something. And I was like, okay.
He's got it. He's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's at the stage, he's got all of his note cards down. He's probably got almost 100 note cards. I'm like, this is not a 5-paragraph essay. This is going to be a giant report, right? He's loving it. He's absolutely loving it. And I think he's like, do you have a book on Melville Chamberlain or something? I'm like, I don't know who that is. I'm sorry.
Okay. Listen, if Neville Chamberlain had not stepped down as the Prime Minister of England and Churchill took back over, we'd all be speaking German right now, I think. So he's an important dude. Your kid's onto something.
Okay. I will let him know that I have been properly educated. And I'll be setting up a time for you two to talk World War II, apparently.
All day. I could do it all day. I love it. Yeah, I mean, I think mine was a similar thought. I laugh when I look at our notes because we've got our Google Doc of shared notes where we just kind of keep ourselves organized. And Amanda always has a paragraph of her thoughts, and mine is always like four words. It's like, this is my thought, and it's just enough to trigger my own thought process, so I don't actually type anything out. And I just put my note just as your role as a facilitator, right? As a homeschool parent, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to relearn anything. You just have to be able to help them find resources. And as they get older, they get better at being able to find their own resources. So then they start bringing stuff to you. I mean, my kids bring me stuff all the time. Can I take this class online? It's $200. Can I take this class? Can I join this group? Can I do? Yeah, go. They just start to figure out how to find their own resources. But in the early days, it's just your role at facilitating, opening those doors for them. So I love it. And I do agree. I think a history professor would totally love to nerd out with your kid. I mean, think about the number of kids that they're staring at every day at college who are taking their course because it's a required course. And the kids are like zoned out. It's so awful teaching kids that don't want to be there and don't want to listen. And so a kid that actually wants to listen and is like, yes, right? They'd be all over that. So I love it.
Yeah. I mean, we literally live a block away from a community college. So I'm going to take a minute to do some research and see what we can make happen there. That'll be
Yeah,
fun.
I think they would be all over that. I love it. I love it. I had a note on 199. It was just one sentence that I loved that said, "You should remember that you are not teaching a class of 30 children, but just your own child, something you've been doing for years." And I think there's this thing that happens, and it's because we've been brainwashed as a society of what education looks like, right? That there's this thing that happens where it's like you have been teaching your child since the day they were born, right? You got your kid on a sleep schedule, you taught your kid how to feed themselves, they learned how to potty train, or they are potty trained, right? They've learned to put their shoes on, they've learned to kind of dress themselves, maybe, all this kind of stuff, right? They maybe they're brushing their teeth. They're learning how to cooperative play. They know how to share. They know how to interact with friends. They're doing all this stuff in the first, 1, 2, 3, 4 years of their life with no curriculum and with no lesson plans and nothing, right? You're just living. You're living your life. You're leading by example. You're having conversations. They're picking these things up. Then it's like they're about to turn 5 and it's like, I need all the curriculum advice because there's no way my kids are ever going to learn numbers and letters without curriculum. And I'm like, probably they already know their numbers and letters, first of all, right? Or there's no way they're going to learn to read without curriculum. They've already done all this other stuff without it. So I'm not saying never buy curriculum. I mean, I don't buy curriculum and I haven't bought curriculum, but there's certainly a place for it if that's what's comfortable for you. But it's not like this light switch flips from age 4 to age 5. Like kindergarten starts, now everything must come from a book. I see posts in Facebook groups that are like, I want my kids to learn, and it's things that are like core values about like being a good human or, communication or something like that. And it's like, where can I find a curriculum on that? And I'm like, you're going to buy a curriculum on being a good human, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that just comes from dinner table conversation and existing in the world and coaching them through scenarios that they're about to have and things like that, right? Where you're preparing them for an encounter that they're potentially going to have with another adult or a friend and talking through friend issues and things like that. And I'm like, not everything has to come from curriculum. You
Yeah.
might want
Oh,
to use curriculum for some things, but you don't need a curriculum for every single thing that you possibly teach. There's plenty to be. You've already taught them a ton of stuff without it. It's nothing changes. You can still teach without it.
it's true. I will say I had a chuckle at your note because you put curriculum is not the only way to learn. Example, potty training curriculum. I 100% use potty training curriculum. I had,
Stop it.
I did. It was all laid out. There was a plan A and there was a fallback plan B, and there was what was happening on this day and what was happening on that day. That made me chuckle.
Oh
But
my
I
gosh. Because that's
I
normally a conversation that I have with people where, they'll talk about something and I go, what potty training curriculum did you use? And they're like, I didn't. And then I'm like, yeah, but your kids still learn to potty train, but you've just blown my whole thing now. I
I
can't,
did. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I
Somebody
mean,
else might say.
someone is going to say, well, actually, there's this great book and it's got a great timeline in the back that you can use and you can modify it if you want.
Okay.
um,
I tossed a sticker chart on the wall and that was it. So it was when my first kid was a sticker chart kid, totally worked. Second kid was super crafty, which we had Astrid on. If you listen to the one, she's an artist, right? So potty training wasn't her first exposure to stickers. The kid was living in the world of crafts. So she was like, what do I need more stickers for? Just to pee in the potty. So for her, we used to put on, oh my gosh, what was it? It was a Harry Belafonte song, and I can't remember which one it was, but we would have a dance party every time. And then the third kid seemed immune to all of it. And, it's like they say, like the law of diminishing returns, like each kid, you get a little more tired. And so by the third kid, I was like, screw it. And I bought him M&Ms. And I had never done that with the other two. And I was like, okay. But literally it was like, boom, done. And yeah, I didn't use curriculum, but I'm happy that your kid knows how to use the potty now. That's awesome. We both got there in the end.
we did. But I mean, your point is still true, right? There are plenty of things that he learned without a curriculum. Just potty training wasn't one of them.
That's too funny. Oh my gosh. All right. I love it. All right. What else you got?
All right. So my next comment was just after that. So I had it on page 200. It says, my wife and I don't see ourselves as managing our children's development according to a strict schedule. We are simply nurturing our children, trying to be the best parents we can. And, that's another one of those those statements that you wouldn't necessarily have to pick up on, but I really appreciated that it's in there. And I think that's true for every parent for the most part, right? Like most of us choose to homeschool because we have decided that that's what's best for our child for any number of reasons. And, it's not that we are concerned that they're going to get to this point or that point right away or right on time. It's more a question of getting there this way isn't working for them. But I know for a fact they can get there. And I think we can do it a different way.
Mhm.
And yeah, I appreciated that. I was trying to pull out things that I actually appreciated because it could have really, I mentioned before, I don't do very well with significant negativity, and this could have really been a shit show. So
We're pulling out the silver lining moments,
yeah.
I made a note on 202 about HSLDA. I'm going to guess, Amanda, that you're a better person than me and you are not a subscribing member to the evil giant HSLDA.
We are not. No.
I am. There was I had a situation when we lived in North Carolina. So if you're not familiar with HSLDA, it's the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Or
yeah.
Action. Yeah. And basically it's this uber conservative army of lawyers that are there to protect you from government infringement. And, I've raised my kids in this environment of what money you spend is a vote towards the world that you want to live in, right?
Mhm.
So by buying organic food, you're voting for, yes, I would like for my food source to be pure and I would like for it to not be filled with toxic chemicals and whatever else. If you buy a ticket to the circus or to SeaWorld, you're saying that you're okay with those animals being treated that way. So they've been raised with that mentality. And HSLDA is like one of the things that I'm like, they lobby and they vote for things that I do not support, right? They're super anti-LGBT, they're racist in many ways, and it's $100 a year, and I want to throw up a little bit every time it renews. But, I'm in these Facebook groups for homeschoolers, as I think most of us are, because that's how we all connect. And you hear horror stories about government overreach. And when we lived in North Carolina, there was a family and the mom posted and she was like, CPS came today, the Child Protective Services showed up and, they wanted to talk to me. And all these parents in the comments were like, you do not have to let them in. They were going to come back. You do not have to let them in, this, that, and the other thing. And they came back and she let them in, which right there, I was like, okay, why? Right.
Mhm.
And they gave her this huge to-do list. They started controlling her homeschool life. They were asking her to do stuff that the law didn't even require for homeschoolers. They had no idea what the homeschool laws even were. And it was kind of this ongoing saga in our Facebook groups when I lived in North Carolina for like months of her reporting back on her interactions with CPS and all that stuff. And it just scared the crap out of me so bad that I was like, I have to. And then there was another one in Pennsylvania so Pennsylvania is one of the highest regulation states we have in the US, right? And apparently you have to teach fire safety. Now, what that would look like would vary. I mean, we've had like fire drills, quote unquote. I mean, we have a second floor ladder for the kids. It goes in the oldest kid's room because the ladder's pretty heavy and everybody knows where they're supposed to go, how they're supposed to get out, like all that stuff, right? Somehow this mom had her kids like on the roof. Now, what that means, I don't really know. Like we have a little garage roof landing outside the kids' bedrooms. If you go out two of the kids' bedrooms, you'll end up on a 1-story garage roof landing. It's not anything crazy, right? And so it might be something like that. I like just picturing what this person was doing. And a neighbor called the police on this mother for endangering her children. And it blew up into this massive CPS thing. And she was required by law to do fire safety in Pennsylvania. And she was executing that how she saw fit. And it turned into this whole thing. And so enough of those stories have just scared the living daylights out of me that I send my money to the giant evil and close my eyes and just do the thing. But I really wish there was another. There are others that are popping up, but none of them are as powerful, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like a deal with the devil for me because I want the security and I want the peace of mind, but I really hate giving them my $100 a year.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's kind of that throwback to and we've talked about it before, right? How much homeschooling is changing and diversifying. And those changes have become more prominent in probably the last 10 years. But it takes organizations like that a long time to become strong, powerful lobbyists, whether you support that or not, right? And, if something happens, sometimes you do have to go the route that you don't really want. I mean, that's the reality of being a grown up in this world, right? So, I mean, I can see that. We haven't been in that scenario or in that situation or had anything like that really happen. And it helps that California is one of the lower regulation states, right? There's not that much that we actually have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so kind of moving on from that one, but
Yeah.
the very next page was my next note. So on 203, the bottom of the page talks about families who like to have an idea of what schools are teaching. And, that same kind of thing. You do fire drills at school, you do fire drills at home. What all are they doing at school and how do we do it in our own school? And I do think that that's an easier thing to do now, to have an idea of what's being taught kind of at each grade or what's expected, because you have Common Core. And I know Common Core is a dirty word in a lot of homeschool circles. I'm actually very pro Common Core. I think, well, that's a whole other. I can get on that soapbox another time. But Common Core, in and of itself, does outline third graders should be learning this in science, and third graders should know this as far as civics curriculum or civics information goes. So it's pretty easy to look at those things and see like, oh, we didn't talk about that at all. Yeah, we should introduce health now, or we should talk about the voting system now. And so, I mean, I do think it makes it easier. And he had some interesting suggestions. I wasn't on board with all of them, but there was one series, the What Your First Grader Needs
Mm-hmm.
to Know series. They have them for every grade.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty affordable. It covers all the things, including art, which is not a Common Core standard that you're going to find somewhere else, but it does talk about, so, like this year, teach them about perspective and teach about these artists and those kinds of things. And I found it really reassuring. I didn't use it very much, but I liked having ideas of other things to use besides just the make sure you do your ELA and your science, So, if you're looking for something and you want to go beyond the Common Core stuff, it's super easy to find online. You can Google it so easily, and it's broken down by grade and easy to figure out. And most curriculums or websites that you might use as a curriculum, they line up with it. Like I know when he was younger, he did Mystery Science, and Mystery Science tells you like what Common Core standard each lesson meets up with, and Generation Genius does too. So it's really easy to find that information and make that connection if that's something you care about. And you don't have to. Lots of people don't worry about it. If you're on the end of the spectrum where you do care about it, it's pretty easy. And it's that thing. You can really go to town. You can get your I can statements if you're in California. If you're not in California when you want them, I'm sure they're down somewhere down. You can get your own PDF. And they've just made them like palatable Common Core statements, or something as simple as this one book of like everything your ex grader needs to know.
Mm-hmm.
And it covers all kinds of stuff.
I've seen those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen those mentioned in quite a few places. Yeah. I mean, I loved it. So there was a post in a group that Amanda and I are both in. It's a group that I admin, and I had posted something about state standards or something like that. And like everybody was like, I don't care. Why would I care? Like all this kind of stuff. And I remember Amanda sending to like a group text that we were in and being like, is it just I care? Like, is it just me? And I was like, if it's working for you, that's fine. But I'm like, I don't care what you're not you, the public school. I don't care what you're doing, like do whatever you want, but the resources are there. So if it's important to you, and I do see posts too where people are like, they're not sure if they're going to stick with homeschooling or high school scares them. High school's not scary, but they're scared of it at the time. And so it's like, well, we're going to homeschool for now. Right. But then when it gets important or when it gets really serious, maybe I'll put them back in school. And so they want to kind of have that alignment there just for security blanket. Right. Which I totally get.
Yeah. I mean, I have a few different reasons for caring, right? But there's also the fact of the matter that I have a lot of health problems, and I am disabled, and um, it's taboo to talk about or whatever. But I have only had COVID once. I got COVID, and I had a lot more health problems after getting COVID. I was in the high risk group. I continue to be in that very high risk group, and I went from being disabled but pretty well able to function to struggling to live my daily life, now that I have long COVID. And the reality is, it could be one more of those infections, whether it's COVID or anything else, that makes it so that I can't, that I can't function in my family the way that I do now. Um, or God forbid something else worse were to happen. The reality is no one else in my family, my immediate or extended family, is going to homeschool my child. He's going to have to be able to go back into a brick and mortar school, and likely, a public one. Um, I don't foresee us paying the amount of money for the private school that we'd love for him to go to, right? So, it's a reality for some people, and some people really do have to think about it, and that's okay.
Yep.
No, we try to be a judgment-free zone for the most part, unless you're John Holt and Pat Farenga, and then we've got a lot of judgment for you. We're gonna start getting hate mail from Pat Farenga and be like, oh, I'm
I was thinking when you said like it's taboo to talk about COVID, I was like, I think when I called HSLDA the evil giant like 10 minutes ago, anybody who thinks long COVID is taboo tuned out already. So when I said that they were a racist, homophobic organization, people were like, that's why I love them. Click. And then we lost them. So, if anybody was just popping in for that, and yeah, that was the end of that. So you can talk about it all you want.
We're definitely calling a very specific membership here.
Exactly. Okay, so 205 was state standards. 206. So 206 starts off with a discussion about okay, in our very first topic episode, we talked about knowing your why for homeschooling. That understanding what your why is, and then having that be your guiding path on your journey. So it's interesting because 206 starts with, it is useful for you and your spouse to clarify how you will homeschool, not only to answer skeptics' questions about what it is you're doing, but also to keep yourselves from becoming rattled when things aren't going smoothly. So I totally agree with knowing your why. I think it's a great guiding path. I think, you'll see in Facebook groups 1,000,001 recommendations pop up all the time. And it's so easy to be like, I'll download it, I'll buy it, And so it's like having that why statement there to be able to go, does this align with my why? Does this align with my long-term goals? Before you end up, like a scattered, ADHD squirrel trying to cross the road. And so not good, right? But the piece here about skeptics' questions, I don't answer skeptic questions. Do you, Amanda?
But there's that line, right? I think there are a lot of well-intentioned people who just don't know. And in fairness, I was one of those. I have some less than flattering stories from growing up of people that I knew who were homeschooled that really personify why I would not homeschool my child. So I can understand, right, where that comes from. And if it's coming from a place of not knowing and they're open to hearing the stories or the differences or open to learning, I can talk about that kind of stuff all day. I love sharing different perspectives, and, I'll learn a little bit more about where they're coming from, and they'll learn a little bit more about where I'm coming from. And they might not change their mind, but they have a more informed opinion, and they hear of some of the other sides of it, right? And so I do get involved in those kinds of conversations fairly often. But there are the people who, just they have no intention of changing their opinion. And yeah, I don't need that.
I think I'm game for the conversations that you will engage in, right? Because I don't necessarily consider them skeptics, but more just unsure, uninformed, curious, whatever the case might be, right? But then there's the ones that are just not into it, right? They're not into homeschooling. They don't understand it. But to your point, they're not interested in learning either. Do you ever see stuff like sometimes I'll have this with my husband where he'll ask me a question. He'll ask me like, do you like A or B? And I say, I like B. And then he's like, I really prefer A for this reason. And I'm like, why the hell did you ask me then? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and so,
Hmm.
I kind of feel like the people that come to it from that perspective, where it's like it comes in the form of a question or it comes in the form of curiosity, but really it's just closed minded judgment. I'm like, this is not a conversation that we'll be having, right? I don't have enough spoons. I don't care, right? We're just not
Yeah.
doing that. I have a ton of questions for you about your choice of schooling for your children. Shall I ask those as well? Right? Would you like me to inquire about those things? You know, and so I just tend to not even go there. I do think though, for anybody who's dealing with that, I will say I got more of those questions early on.
Yeah.
Now that we've been homeschooling for so long and people sit back and look at my kids, and not to say like my kids are the greatest thing since sliced bread, like all of our kids are. And the more they're homeschooled, the more you see it. So the proof is in the pudding. The longer you've done it, people are like, holy cow, they see the opportunities my kids have. They see the interests that they have, the experiences that they are willing to dive into. And so it has shut up all of that discussion that took place early on as far as all those things are concerned. So I will say it's for me at least, I think it was a temporary thing. If you can get through the early part of having to listen to some of that garbage, it will go away, which is really, really nice.
Yeah.
So I think that helps.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely died down for us, right?
Mhm.
A lot of that not sure about it, like they see, like you said, the
Yeah.
proof is in the pudding. And for the ones who haven't actually verbalized that, like I have a friend who I really care about and value their opinion, and they actually begged me not to homeschool when we first made that decision. They felt very, very, very strongly about it. And I understood where they were coming from, right? I won't disclose where they're coming from because that would make it easier to figure out who I'm talking about, right? And it's not about that. Um, but it was, that thing of like, okay, I mean, at this point, we're just going around in circles. I know how you feel. And I put a lot of thought into this and I know what we've decided to do. And, I hope that with time, she's seeing the amazing leaps and bounds that he's taking and is like, yeah, wow, I really still don't understand it, because of where I'm coming from and what I do for a living and, all of that kind of stuff. But clearly it's working for them. Right. And so it can work, I guess. I
Hmm.
don't really understand how or why, but it can work. Um, and and I think that's all we can really ask for, right? I mean, that's every decision in life when people disagree with it. Either they're open to seeing how it goes, or they decide they're not willing to, and then you don't have to worry about them at all at that point because they're just like, "Yo, peace out."
Yeah, exactly. And I think I've kind of managed to come up with a way that's friendly enough where I can kind of do it with a smile, but just kind of exude this energy that's like, it's not fucking up for discussion, right? Like, they're my
Yeah.
children,
Hmm.
right? It's not up for discussion. You want me to parent your kids? Do you want me to tell you what to do with your kids? I can come over and assess your schedule and how your closets are organized. Like, I can run any part of your life if you'd like me to from the outside, but it's not your life. It's my life and they're my children. Right.
Hmm.
And so I think there is sort of this energy, like, even if you're not confident and you're new and you're trying to figure it out, fake it. Right. Fake it.
Yeah.
Go in with confidence. I know I am doing the right thing for my kids. And you wouldn't have made the choice if you didn't know it deep down. But I think everybody feels that shakiness at the beginning.
Oh yeah. God, am I making the right decision? Am I going to
Right.
super screw my kid up? Like, do I know what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But don't let them sense it. Don't admit, right? Admit it to the
Don't let him
people.
sense the fear.
Right. But I mean, you could admit your fears to the
Yeah.
people that you trust,
Hmm.
and but somebody who's doubting you, go in with confidence and just be like, this is the right choice. I've made it and we're doing it. Right. And the kids are going to
Yeah.
be amazing and it's awesome. And, I don't even, there's no room for question there. Right. It's
Yeah.
like most people haven't even had the nerve to question me because I'm like, my choice, my kids. Oh, well, don't really care what you think. Right.
Hmm.
The end. So yeah, have confidence. And to a certain degree, it's you don't owe them that engagement, right? You owe them nothing. So if you want to engage, if somebody's friendly and curious and all that, like Amanda said at the beginning, go for it if you want to have that conversation, even if it doesn't change their mind or whatever. But if, as long as it's a genuinely curious conversation, but you don't owe anybody explanations about what you choose to do with your children. And that includes your mother-in-law and whoever else, right? I mean, they are your kids, right?
Yeah, they had their chance. They raised their child, and if they didn't, that's not my problem. Um,
Sorry, I laughed because there's a thing in John Mulaney's comedy special on Netflix, Baby J, and he's talking at one point about grandparents dying and stuff like that. And he talks about the dad's mom being like the least important grandparent out of the four. And he says, he goes, all right, kids, do this. He goes, go and ask your mom if she thinks that your dad's mom did a good job raising him. And the whole audience like loses it, you know? And it's like, okay. So I laughed when you said that. You know, it's like, you had your chance. You raised your kids. These ones are mine. Right?
yeah, yeah, for real. Okay, so that was based on 206.
Yeah.
And I had just kind of a general from 206 to 208.
I
He's
love your
talking.
note.
So my note specifically says, really? So school at home or unschooling? I just hate basically everything about this section. So he does. He's like there. So basically it breaks down to two categories. You either school at home or you're unschooling. And
There's nothing in between.
yeah, like those are the two categories. You're schooling at home and you're giving tests and it's awful and you don't know how to homeschool, or you're unschooling and it's amazing. And I was kind of like, kiss my ass. But he did at least throw in a try not to let the purists of either persuasion get to you. And for me, this is one of those classic examples. In our house, in our family, we talk a lot about the fact that everything in life is a grayscale and you can't pretend like things are black and white. There's 1% black and there's 1% white and there's 98% grayscale somewhere in between. And I do think that that's also true with homeschooling, right? So you can try to say that it's black school at home and it's white unschooling, but 98% of it is somewhere in the middle. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's really okay.
Well, then I think even like with unschooling, I've joined. So I'm part of a bunch of unschooling groups on Facebook. And shout out to Carla Marie Williams, who will be a guest in the future, who has a really awesome unschooling community of about 10,000 people. And she's amazing. She's written books and she's just awesome. But then I've joined other unschooling groups on Facebook where I am like, what planet am I on? Right? They are. And we've been unschooling for a really long time. And I feel like a fish out of water in those groups. They are so extreme that, and so there is now a segment of unschooling that's called radical unschooling, which is literally never forcing anything on your kids. And if that's working for you, that's awesome. I'm super happy for you. But I joined some of those groups and I was seeing posts about like, you know, kids that were 7, 8, 9 years old who weren't potty trained yet, going back to potty training curriculum, right? Because the parents were still waiting for them to just figure it out on their own and do it. There was no encouragement or push or anything. It was like completely hands off. And I'm like, hey, again, they're your kids, whatever, right? But I was like, okay, that's not the way we unschool, right? I do still, we talk about goals and we talk about how we want to achieve them and things like that. And so, yeah, even within each bracket of, you know, school at home or unschooling or whatever, then there's another sorting category almost, right? So it's really, really interesting to see. I had posted in a group one time looking for a class on MLA citations, right? I was looking at one of my kids was about to take her first college class. She was super excited about it, but she'd never done MLA citations before. She had taken classes online about how to write papers and stuff like that. But I thought, oh, she might need to cite stuff. P.S. As it turns out, the class she took, she totally didn't need them. But I had her take this class anyway beforehand. I said to her, hey, this might be important. What do you think? And she was like, oh, if I'm going to have to do it, I have no idea what that is. And I was like, you might need it. Right. So she said, yeah, let's do that. Let's kind of tick that off. And so she signed up for this class. Now I posted in a group looking for a recommendation for a teacher who could teach them to her because it's been 20 something years since I cited something using the MLA standard and I have no idea. So I got this comment from this person who I've interacted with groups before and has opinions. Okay. And she was like, I thought you were an unschooler. Why would you need a class? Why is your kid even going to college if you're an unschooler? And I'm like, unschoolers go to college all the time, right? Like all the time. They're not out of alignment with one another. There's absolutely nothing about that that means that that can't be there. There's nothing there that says that an unschooler can't use curriculum. There's nothing that says that an unschooler can't have a textbook. The difference for me, right? And again, there's a sorting selection in unschooling. So there's people who might feel differently than me, and that's cool. Unschooling is interest led, it's child led. It's not a top down system of education. It's a symbiotic relationship, which is interesting because you're a schooler
Mhm.
and you are not a top down. Like you have that open communication with your kid where he has a say in what he's doing. So that's not even specific to unschooling, that only unschoolers get to have a say in their education, right?
Mhm.
Because you have that open communication where kiddo gets to, I prefer, he gets some choices, A, B, or C. I prefer this one, right? Okay, great. Or
Mhm.
it's not working. What do you think we should change? But it's not to say that unschoolers can't have books or can't have formal instruction. The
You
difference
can't
is
learn how to cite your sources. You're unschooled.
exactly,
Do you even know how to hold a pencil?
Like I have like my 16-year-old just finished his first semester of college. He starts his next one on Monday. He's taking summer classes this summer. I spent $300 on textbooks when the kid went to school, right? It's not like I wrote to the professor, he cannot have a book because he has been unschooled until this point,
He is 16 and he's unschooled, so we will be taking this class without books. Thank you very much.
Exactly. In fact, can you teach it in the forest where they only gather sticks? You know, like that's not how it works. So I think sometimes it's like there's these blinders about what something
Mhm.
is. And it's like, okay, well, first of all, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Going back to your very first point about this section, there's as many ways to unschool as there are unschoolers. And same thing for you and being an academic homeschooler. But there's kind of these outside influences that come in where people are like, well, I thought this and you can't do that. And I'm like, first of all, why are you telling me what I can't do with my kids? And second of all, you're dead wrong. So I'm like, no, none of the above.
You're second of all. Second of all, you're just dead wrong.
Yeah, you're wrong. And so it
Shut
was
up and
funny
sit
because
down.
I wrote like a whole response to her comment and then she deleted her comment. And I was like, oh, nice, dirty delete. Good job, girlfriend. You know,
Yeah.
I'm like, I've been unschooling my kids for years and years. I don't even think this person homeschools. So I was like, but yes, tell me what my kids can and can't do. Please, please do.
Yeah.
It's
Please,
just
I'm
bananas.
so clueless. I don't know.
I know. I don't know how I've
Happening with
gotten
my
this far.
children. Uh,
Yeah,
oh.
so true. So yeah, that's not a thing. And then I also had a note on the next page. Okay, so this is huge. And we actually have on our kind of topic board for future episodes talking about kids and interests, right? Because how many times do you hear like, well, my kid has no interest. They're not interested in anything. And anything I propose, they poo-poo and they're not interested. They're dragging their feet, etc. Right? So on the bottom of 208, it says, I asked my daughters what I thought was a casual question. What would you like to learn about this summer? And so I have some thoughts on that, right? Because I think that that's how parents approach it oftentimes, right? Like, what kind of a unit study should we do? What kind of projects should we do, right? And so if I say to you, imagine you're like 8 or 10, Amanda, and I say like, what kind of a unit study do you want to do next? What does your brain go to? What do you think as a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old?
I mean, even as a 43-year-old, I'm like, can we not?
Right?
Like, actually, I'll pass on the unit study. Like, there's nothing.
Yeah. I mean, they're like, oh, great work. I'm going to have to like
Mhm.
do stuff that I don't want to do,
Exactly. Can we not? Like, what kind of
Exactly.
unit study? How about none? Can we not?
Exactly. Let's not, right? And so I think the questions need to be so organic and so natural, in my opinion, in order to truly understand their interests, right? So when my kids were younger, now I don't really have to dig for interests anymore. Now they have more interest than we have hours in the day. Like, I'm like, slow it down, right? But when they were younger and you're still trying to expose them to a lot of things and figure things out, right? So I will never forget, like my littlest, I took him out for pizza one day. And so it was just super casual. It was just me and him. And we're sitting there. We brought a deck of cards and we're having pizza. And I would ask him questions like, He's an insomniac. So I'd be like, when you can't sleep at night, what is your brain thinking about? Right. He's got raging ADHD. And so his brain is always churning on something that's really big in his world. Right. So I'm like, what's churning in your brain? And it would be something like, well, I'm trying to figure out how, ships float or something, when he was really, really young. And I'm like, okay. And that's where I could get my ideas from for things that we needed. Right. Or, like, what do you think our library is missing in terms of books? Like, is there a subject area that you wish they had more books on? And they'd be like, oh, I've read like every book they have on, I don't know, making croissants, and it's like, okay, so we need to get deeper. Like, let's see what we can find about French pastry then. And it's like, okay, great. Like, so I think it's how you ask those questions. And I think so many times when I see parents saying like, my kids have absolutely no interest, that's a piece of it, is that ability to get there. And then the second piece of it that I see all the time is that they will trust you with their interests once. And when you turn it into work and when you make it miserable, that's the end, right?
Well, who wants to have one of their favorite things taken and turned miserable? Like, I
Right.
sure don't, like I feel that way about books. I love to read, but then people will be like, oh, you should write a book. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound fun. Like, that sounds like a lot of work. I don't know. I don't know. Just no,
Yeah,
like,
that's it, and there's a book called Project-Based Homeschooling that I love. And the author is like, they're not stupid, right? They know that if they tell you, you're going to make them work. And so if you turn it into a chore and you turn it into drudgery, they will never tell you again. They have interests. They don't trust you with their interests because it's going to end up being an awful experience for them. So I think those are the two things, is like asking the good questions to really figure out what they are. And then secondly, don't fuck it up, right?
yeah.
Don't be like, oh, let's build a diorama out of toothpicks. And your kid has zero freaking interest in building a diorama out of toothpicks. And it becomes this miserable experience. And then they're like, well, I'm never telling her what I'm interested in again because she's going to whip out toothpicks again.
Yeah. No, this is going to be a great podcast when we actually talk about this, because I have questions. I have questions and I have
I'm,
ideas. But
oh,
it's going to
good.
be a good one.
I'm
Yeah.
excited. But yeah, I thought when that came in, I was like pretty pumped about that. I was like, yeah, there's a lot there. So it's pretty cool. I
Yeah.
have kind of a dream guest speaker when we talk about interests, and it's bold. It's like somebody who did a TED talk. But
Yeah, I saw it on the list and I was like, I would love that. We could make that the book club book and have them on. Like, wouldn't
yes.
that be amazing? We probably need to wait a couple months. We probably need to get more than like 5 people listening to the podcast.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. Get friends to listen so we can get this guest on because they're totally
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, that'd be
But
awesome.
yeah, I would love that. So, and I'm
Hmm.
pretty bold. I'll reach out and ask and just be like, I'm shooting my shot. Like, let's see if it
Yeah.
works. But I'm pretty excited. So hopefully it happens. You never know.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not sure what happened, but we both skipped like a lot of pages. My next notes are on page 215. And so the quote that I highlighted was, by expanding these exceptions to allow children and teenagers to observe real work or engage in it as apprentices, we will help them learn what is needed to do work well. Children also learn how to interact with others to get jobs done and how to leave work they don't enjoy and find work they want to try. These skills are not only not taught in school, but actually tend to atrophy in most schools. One typically works in silence, in competition for grades, and is penalized for sharing information. And one cannot change jobs when it is apparent that one does not have the capacity or interest to continue in a particular course in school and would like to try something different. And so for me, it was an aha moment, and also like, well, I guess I kind of like I have a little bit of a disagreement, right? So, aha, and it's true, right? When you go into the real world, if you get a job and you just suck at it, you're not like, well, I gotta stay here because this is the job I was assigned, gotta plug through geometry this year. Like, it's not like that, right? In the real world, you get to say like, actually, this is not where I'm going to start looking for a new job,
Yeah. Pivot, pivot.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
exactly. So it's true, school doesn't teach from that regard. On the flip side, I was just talking with a friend of mine about the fact that her kiddo really struggles with project-based learning and being in groups because he's quite advanced. And so he always ends up carrying the group. And she was like, I don't know if we should stay in a project-based learning school. They are not at a place where homeschooling is an option for them. And so they're not in a traditional brick and mortar school. They're in a little different type of school. And I said, well, unfortunately, he's the type of kid that is going to carry the group project for the rest of his life. He's going to get put on teams at work and he's going to carry that team. So I guess it sucks, but it's not necessarily a bad thing for him to learn. Like, unfortunately, dude, if you're going to be the go-getter that you are, you're just going to carry the team and you got to find a way to make peace with it. So I was a little like, I mean, I get it, but there are also realities of the real world, particularly depending on personality type. Right?
Well, and there's conversation that I see probably more so in the unschooling maybe circles than not, although I'm not positive. I haven't like tracked scientifically where I see these things. That group projects are preparation for corporate life, right? Because even if it's not a specific group project, I worked in the corporate world for 10 soul crushing years, as I have shared before. And there will always be people who you sit back and go, how does this person still have a job?
They do
I'm like,
nothing.
They do nothing and then get promoted, right?
Oh, yeah. Because they're great at putting their name on everyone else's work, right?
Great. They were also anatomically significantly different than I was too, which, helps in the corporate world. So, and it was just like, oh my gosh. And so that those school projects are preparing kids for, you're going to shoulder the project and that's just what it is, right? That's life. So it's like, to your point, it's kind of like, this is how it is. I mean, there's other thoughts about like perfect attendance award, right? I mean, I just wrote an article. It's actually on my desk here somewhere, but I just wrote an article for our local paper. I write about homeschooling for the paper. And the title was Understanding History Can Help Shape Homeschooling Path. Understanding History Can Help Shape Homeschooling Path. That's not the title I submitted. It's like missing some words. It's clunky. Anyway, I haven't read it yet since it was published, but apparently there was a sizing issue with whatever I submitted. But it talks about the fact that the General Education Board began with an endowment from John D. Rockefeller, right? He went to the National Education Board and was like, I need workers. How are we going to train them? And so this is how it is. So when you think, well, why is there a perfect attendance award? Well, because our school system was founded by a capitalist giant who did not want people calling out sick from work. So that's why we have a perfect attendance award. And that's why things didn't matter that your grandma died. It didn't matter that you need a mental health day. It doesn't matter that you're sick and you're going to bring germs and infect half the rest of the classroom. Show up, right? This is what you do. And it's preparation for grown-up life in a really crappy environment. So, I can totally see that. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And, if you have 3 kids like yours that are all into being entrepreneurs and doing that sort of thing, then, it's less important to know and learn. I have a kid who will probably go a much more traditional work route. And he's going to need to learn that before his first job. And he's like, what the hell? Like, why are these people not working as hard as me? And the reality is he'll get that in college, right? Like he wants to go to college. He wants to go to a traditional college. He's going to get put on a group project that he's going to be like, why? Why are these people
doing
not pulling
everything?
their weight? Yeah. And it'll be a discussion that we have.
Well, then I think group projects, especially for neurodivergent kids, is just a double whammy, right? Because I have one who really struggles with neurodivergent projects. He's exceptionally gifted. He's super neurodivergent. So there is a lot of black and white in his world. Like you said, the world is 98% great. Not in his world, right? He does not live in that world, right? And so there is a right way and a wrong way to do something and things like that. And so he went to camp last summer. He went to a robotics camp where they had to work on a team. And he was there to build the winning robot. And the other kids who were there weren't treating it necessarily like it was a blood sport, right? So it was a struggle. There was a phone call every day, like, Mom, I'm so frustrated with my teammates and this and that, And so, group projects are, right? There's a lot to learn from them that have nothing to do with the topic of the actual project.
Oh, yeah. The vast majority of the learning has nothing to do with what you're actually studying or presenting on.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so you have a note for 217, and then I've skipped ahead to 222. So what have you got on page 217?
I was gonna go 217, but I think I'll just touch on it briefly, and because we're like super chatty today on our topics. So I was talking about transcripts here. It says my challenge in translating their activities and our conversations and experiences into a form that would fit in the subject area boxes in my logbook. And so I'm actually speaking at a homeschool conference next month on this exact topic. How do you take a unique learning experience like we all have, no matter how academic or how loosey goosey you are? It does not look the way it looks in school, or at least
Mhm.
hopefully it doesn't. And how do you translate that into people that have a super tunnel vision view of education? But I think that's probably going to end up needing to be an episode of its own, just
All on
talking.
its own. Yeah.
And you know what? We did just pick our third book, which is about transcripts.
Yep.
So I'll save it
There
for
we go.
then.
All
There you
right.
go.
There we go.
222.
Perfect.
Take it away, Amanda.
So this was another aha moment for me. The original author is talking about when he was a classroom teacher and kids doing poorly on a writing assignment. And he said, quote, the remedy was to try and give a wide enough variety of choices and opportunities for writing, reading, and talking so that everyone would have a fairly good chance of showing his best talents. And I had never thought of public school and the assignments that are done in school along those lines. But it would make sense to me that a good teacher wouldn't just be like produce everything this exact same way, right? Like asking students to produce a variety of things so that every student has a chance to be successful. That would be a good teacher, right? And I just hadn't really thought of it. And so by homeschooling, you have the opportunity to find how they best present themselves and just to focus on that instead of making them muddle through several before you find the one, or making them do all of the others and only get to do one or two good ones every once in a while. So I was like, oh, I'd never thought about that. And so then that brings us into chapter 12. And so again, I'm going to be upfront, and I really do not do well with a lot of negativity. I'm much to my family's chagrin, I'm very much a silver lining. We can find the silver lining in anything. So chapter 12 was a real, it was not my friend. It's called School Response, and uh, it's not my friend. Um, I did think it was interesting on the very first page of chapter 12. He says, it is unlikely that in a generation, more than 10% of the families with school age children would be teaching them at home. So that was originally published in 1981. So we're in 2024. We're up to 4% of school age children homeschooling. So I think 45 plus years definitely counts as a generation. And we definitely haven't reached 10%. So he was right, right? I'll give him that. He was absolutely right.
He was right. So we left North Carolina 5 years ago now. I want to say we moved out of that state. And right as I left, the Department of Non-Public Education had put out a like a status of homeschooling thing. Right now, there's a lot of gaps in their numbers for two reasons. The first is the mandatory reporting age is not until 7. So if you're homeschooling kindergarten or first grade, they don't even know your kid exists. And then the other thing is in North Carolina, you open a homeschool. You open it as like a private school, basically, and you register whoever you have in your crew that's already 7. So when I opened my homeschool, for example, I registered 2 kids. My third kid turned 7 while we were there. I was under no obligation to go back in and add him to the school. And so at that time, when we left, it was 18% of the state. And that's underreported for those two reasons. So I think too, it'll kind of ebb and flow where sometimes you're in an area where it's super duper populous and it's a huge homeschool group. And then other times it'll be obviously there's a 0% in there somewhere. If we're landing at 4, somebody's
Yeah.
dragging that down. So somebody's
Yeah.
not holding up their end of the bargain. So it's interesting. In
Mhm.
Texas, we don't register as homeschoolers. The government doesn't even know you exist. So there's no numbers, right? So I don't have that kind of information for everywhere that we've lived. But I thought it was super interesting when we left there just how huge it was in that state, which is why our homeschool co-op was so big that we were teaching classes in hallways. So
Yeah. Well, and I suppose the flip side of that is you have folks like us in California, we're not considered homeschooling because we're registered with a public school. We are a personalized learning academy, which is a fancy way of saying we get to homeschool with a little bit of oversight from the state. So we
Right.
consider ourselves homeschoolers, right? But not according to any of the numbers that the state would put out. So it's true. There's definitely some wiggle room there. It would be interesting to know what the actual number is. I don't know how you'd ever find it.
Right. Yeah.
But that kind of flows in well to my next point. So, page 230 to 231, there's a discussion of vouchers and charter schools. I'm going to preface this with I think this is a really complicated and very political topic. And so I'm mostly going to steer clear of it, right? Like, I have feelings. I'm sure everyone listening has feelings about vouchers and charter schools, and how it works in California is very different from how it works in Missouri. Some things just got passed in Missouri that my family's real upset about. And so, like it's a whole big thing, and we don't need to talk about it in book club. But one of the things that I did find interesting was that the book is saying, even in the update, that charters aren't taking off. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And maybe they aren't taking off in some places. In California, charters are public schools. And so they still have a lot of oversight because they are public schools. They get public funding and all of that jazz. And so I looked it up. We have over 1,300 charter schools in the state of California. And the book uses some state that's got like 70 or something like that. So I was like, oh, that definitely is one of those things that your mileage may vary depending on where you live.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I could see that. I don't know. I'm so removed from all of that. We've lived in states where there's no funding, no charter option, and probably wouldn't be my jam anyway. I don't want to say it wouldn't be, because you never know. There might be an amazing option. I mean, I'm the super loosey-goosey one, and my oldest kid went to school for ninth grade. When I say school, he went to a Montessori high school with 24 kids in it and no desks at high school level, right?
Mhm.
So it wasn't really like school, but so you never know. Like if something like that came along, oh my gosh, I'd be all over it.
Yeah.
But I just don't know. It's like a definite black hole for me of information. I
Mhm.
just haven't had enough exposure to it or anything like that to really be able to speak intelligently on it. But those are some interesting numbers at a minimum. That's really awesome.
Yeah. All right. So what have you
Interesting.
got? You've got in the 30s. I didn't have anything else in the 230 range.
I just had two things. I had first on 236, there's a reference here to feedback mechanisms in
Mhm.
education. And my brain kind of did a little side hop to something related to what they were talking about in the book. If you have not watched Jeffrey Canada's TED Talks, and his name is Jeffrey spelled like the giraffe from Toys R Us, FYI, it's not with a J. Um, but his TED Talks are amazing. He worked in a public school system in a very underperforming area and had incredible results. But one of his big things was about the testing and the feedback mechanism. He's like, we test these kids at the end of the year. We get all this feedback on them. They go home for the summer. They lose a ton of what we just taught them. They come back and it's a blank slate in the fall. The new teacher doesn't get any of the testing from last year. Like,
Mhm.
this is the dumbest thing possible.
Yeah.
So he's like, I'm not anti-testing, but if we're going to spend all this money to test all these kids, why don't we do it in a way that's actually effective and useful?
Mhm.
So I love him. So that was all. It was just a plug. If you haven't watched Jeffrey Canada's TED Talks, go find them on YouTube. They're amazing. Uh, so love him. And then the other thing was on 238, authority and leadership, it says, because they don't understand natural authority, and by they're referring to the school system. So because they don't understand natural authority, the schools are in an authority crisis. Their coercive authority breaks down more and more, but it is the only kind they know. They find it hard to imagine what it might be like to deal with children who were not in the least afraid of them and whom they had no reason to make afraid. Words alone won't change this. And so I actually wrote down that I think that there's an element of that in homeschooling too. I mean,
Mhm.
I was looking at a post yesterday of this mom who was like, I'm struggling. My kid doesn't seem to have any interest. Like after he's done with his schoolwork, he just wants to like play on his phone or play games or whatever, right? And all this kind of stuff. The number of take away the phone, make them pay for the phone, right? It's this, like there's something there. There's a reason why your kid's not interested in life. We've talked
Mhm.
over and over again in this book about how kids are born curious creatures that just
Mhm.
want to learn and can't get enough information. So what happened? Where did that break down? And like, if you already have a kid who's not feeling a zest for life and who doesn't have a ton of interest, the one thing that they actually find interest in, taking that away, like, is that your genuine step for making this kid really enthusiastic about life. Right? Like,
Mhm.
is that the game plan here? Right. And
Yeah.
so, but there were all these things that were like, make them get a job, make them pay for the phone, all this stuff. And I was like, oh, oh my goodness. Right. And so I think even in the world of homeschooling, there's that authoritarian style.
Yeah,
And
it's quite harsh. I've noticed that
yeah.
as well. Mhm.
Whew. And I was like, oh my goodness, right? Like, and again, it's like match it up to the end result. If the end result is to get this kid engaged, is that the step? Is that how we're doing that? Is by doing it in like the harshest possible way? Like there's no softer way that you can think of to try to engage a child, or compassionate way? Like if you were really struggling. Okay, I went to Target before our book club meeting today, which FYI, totally realized when I got home that I have two of these shirts and one of them has a giant hole in it from playing fetch with the dog. She went to grab the ball and she ripped my shirt. Totally wore that one to Target, didn't realize it. But also survived underwear shopping with my autistic kiddo. And so I feel like I deserve a medal for today because it was
Mhm.
a really smooth, awesome experience. And so I'm pretty pumped about it, right? But I was watching this mom walk through Target today. And listen, we've all had our crap parenting moments in public, right? We've all done it. But
Yep.
it was so interesting to me because I was watching this mom walk down one of the aisles at Target and she's looking and she's shopping and her kid was crying. He wasn't like flailing or like anything. He was the sad cry, like with the tears where it was like, like that little, like, I just can't like regroup. And
Mhm.
she's just like, and I was like, imagine as an adult, like, imagine I'm out shopping with my husband and I have a moment, right? I have
Mhm.
them. We all do. Right. And my husband's just like looking at car parts or like, leather cleaner in the aisle and just letting me stand there and be like, it's like, we would never do that to another adult.
Yeah.
If I was out shopping with you and you're like, I'm just having a really rough day, I'm super stressed, and I was like, all right, did you see this shower curtain? I think this would look great in my guest shower. Like for some reason we don't treat kids like that. Kid needed a sit down, and I get it. Listen, like we've all been having those days where we're just like, I can't freaking deal with this anymore. I got to get what I'm here for and get out of the store. So I'm not like judging the mom, but I'm like, in an ideal world,
Mm.
you'd want to sit down and be like, let's talk through this, right? That kid's having feelings. And if another adult
Yeah.
was having feelings, we'd address them. And so I
Mhm.
feel like the conversation about the cell phone is the same. Like if we all hit our slumps, right? Where we're having, we're not creative, we're not, I go into book slumps sometimes and they're so hard and so sad, right? And I'm just not in the mood to read. And it's like, could you imagine if somebody was like, well, then I'm going to take away your other favorite stuff because you're not doing it. And I'm like, ah, right. And so it's
Yeah.
like, I feel like that's not just limited to a school thing.
Yeah. No,
So,
I totally agree.
yeah.
All right. So we apparently neither one of us really enjoyed the very last of this book. We've got a large chunk without much to be said. So I had a few random notes on page 246. He was going on about anti-continuing education and what a bad idea it was, and I was like, well, I'm pro continuing education generally speaking, and I don't really understand why someone who writes a whole book about the idea of learning in and as life wouldn't want to encourage people who have been stunted by traditional school to continue learning, right? Like why are we anti-continuing education if we're about people like continuing to learn? I don't. Okay. So there's that. And we also cover in 248, he talks about student teachers and what a waste of time student teaching is because they learn in a classroom and then they go into a classroom, but they're not the actual authority in the classroom. So they don't get any useful experience. And like student teachers in classrooms are a waste. And I was like, well, I don't necessarily think that's true. And it doesn't seem as if he's talked to student teachers and been like, hey, do you feel like it's useful to do student teaching before you're just put in a classroom like, hey, here you go, good luck. I
Right.
would guess that the vast majority of student teachers are like, no, I would like to like ease into that and learn some classroom management skills like out in real life before you
They
just
might
put
want more
me.
of it,
Yeah,
right? They
right. I
want
mean,
more than what they're getting.
yeah, I'm sure they probably do. And just so this idea of like, and I mean, it comes back to the fact that he didn't learn to be a teacher. He just went in and was miraculously an awesome teacher until he decided schools didn't know how to school. So yeah, I mean, that's John Holt, and there's no real surprise there. Um, And then we get to the very end, right? So, you had a note where you're kind of talking about like the idea of school hours and like a set schedule makes it hard for kids to want to proactively learn more when they're out of school, right? Because it's the same for grown-ups, right? If you have a job, when you get home, you just want to veg or not think about things because you
Mm.
spent all of your time with this scheduled. I have to learn, or I have to do this. And so what do you want to do with your free time? You're not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to dive into a new research project because that'll be fun with my free time. You're like, no, my brain is jelly. It needs time.
Yeah.
Um, and then, my point was kind of piggybacking on what you said earlier about the Board of Education. At the very end on page 256, the modern day wrap up suggests that schools have lost sight of how to teach students to be good citizens. But I would argue that they're doing exactly what they need to do, and they're teaching kids exactly how to be in the capitalist society that we have become and that we are, for better or worse, truly marching straight towards, right? Like this idea we have become a pretty hardcore capitalist society, and you need a lot of worker bees to make that work. And public school is helping shape people into worker bees and teaching them that unions are bad and, a lot of these kinds of things. Do I agree with it? No, for the most part, I don't agree with it. But I do also disagree with the idea that schools aren't teaching them to be good citizens. They're teaching them to be good citizens in the society in which we live, specifically here in America.
Exactly. And I've seen that quote sometimes, like, where people say our school system is broken. And they're like, no, it's not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Mhm.
Whether or not you want it to do that thing is a different story, but it's functioning as it was built. So it's very true. I mean, it goes back to the fact that it was literally funded by one of the largest capitalists in history,
Mhm.
John D. Rockefeller. So it's functioning as it's supposed to. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I
All right.
totally get it.
So the second half of the book, well, not the second half, but at least like the last fifth of the book is all resources. There's a bunch of appendices, I guess. And it's interesting stuff. Some of it was like, oh yeah, I totally go to that conference, and some of it was like, what the hell? I would never recommend that website. Like, what is the so I suppose from that regard, they do a good job of being quite inclusive with suggesting a wide range of resources, both online and in person. They cover a lot of different countries and programs that are in each
Mhm.
country. So if that's something that you're looking for or you're interested in, it's there. And it's a pretty big chunk of the book.
Yeah.
But that wraps up the book for us.
I know. So I hadn't even had a chance to talk to you about this, Amanda, but I lead a book club online on OutSchool, and I've had the same group for 3 years. They're like the most amazing group of feminist bookworms, and that's the whole foundation of our book club is we read feminist historical fiction. And so at the end of every book, we rate our books. We rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. And I haven't even asked you if we want to do that, so I'm like throwing it in on the spot. But 1 is, this book is horrendous. Why did she make me read this? Which is for book club because I pick the books for our class. And then 10 is like, I love this book and I would recommend it to friends. And I always tell them, I'm like, you can pick a 1. You will not hurt my feelings. We will not all love the same book. So if we were using that scale of 1 to 10, dare I ask where you would rate this book?
I don't know, maybe like a 2.5. I mean, I definitely feel the why did she make me read this? But but bigger picture, like I appreciate I was able to find a few things, and I highlighted a couple resources in it that I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. And we did agree. We both picked out a book that was recommended in it as to be a future book club book. Like, so I mean,
I
maybe
know I'm
it'll
a
be
little
awful,
nervous.
and then it'll be awful.
I know,
You're like, oh
it's
my
like-
god, we should know. Not
like fruit of the poison tree. Like, I'm not really sure if we should be taking it. Yeah. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, how about you?
I'm going to go 3.5.
Okay.
I give it like a little bit of a boost there, but it's not much. So it wouldn't make me want to pick up another John Holt book.
No.
So there's that. So yeah. Well, listen, if you were reading along with us, we hope you got something from it. If you weren't, we saved you a lot of time and energy by digesting the good, bad, and ugly from this book.
Yeah. Because the chapters are long. Even in my audiobook, every chapter was at least 45 minutes for the audiobook. So yeah.
He's got a lot to say.
He's wordy.
Yeah. And our next book is Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney. And we are doing a giveaway for our next book, which is super exciting. Go to our Instagram page. I will put something in our story highlights where you can enter for our giveaway for our book. And Jonathan Mooney will be a guest at the end of our read of that book. So thankfully, I've already read it, and I know I'm not going to trash it. I think you're going to like it, Amanda. So we'll be good. We won't have to fake smile through an author interview. It'll be great.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Thank goodness.
I'm not that good at that.
Oh my goodness. We were a little long today, friends, but there was a lot to say. So super sorry. And we will be back next week with more content and a brand new book. Hooray. Have
Thanks
an
again for
awesome
joining.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a
Happy
good one.
homeschooling, everyone.